Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're staring into the abyss. And I don't even mean that metaphorically. We are tackling one of the oldest, most headache-inducing, and frankly, most terrifying questions that has ever crossed the human mind.
It really is. It's the question that keeps philosophers awake at night,
Yeah,
sends physicists into, existential crises, and is probably the reason half of our listeners have some form of anxiety.
exactly. It's the puppet paradox. The question is deceptively simple. Do I actually make choices? When I decided to wear this shirt today, which in hindsight, questionable choice, or when you, the listener, decided to hit play on this,
Yeah.
was that a genuine, independent decision?
Or was the script written, signed, sealed, and archived 50,000 years before the solar system even coalesced out of a cloud of dust?
It's that classic tension, isn't it? Fate and free will. Are we agents of our own destiny, or are we just biological robots reciting lines in a play we didn't write on a stage we didn't build?
And the conversation usually dead ends in one of two places. Either you get this super dry, abstract philosophy that feels like doing, I don't know, mental algebra. Or you get vague spiritual advice like just go with the flow.
Go with the flow. But today, we are doing something completely different. We are taking a stack of sources that attempts to bridge two worlds that on paper should absolutely not mix.
It's a very strange cocktail we have on the table today.
It is. We have classical Islamic theology, and we're talking high-level metaphysics from 11th century Baghdad. And next to that, we have modern clinical psychotherapy papers from like the last year or two.
And we're trying to see how an ancient understanding of fate is being used right now, today, to treat clinical anxiety, depression, and trauma.
Which sounds completely contradictory. Usually telling a depressed person it's all fate just makes them feel worse. It makes them feel helpless.
Completely. Oh, great, so I'm destined to feel this way.
Right.
It removes all agency.
Right. It's not my fault. The universe just hates me.
Yeah.
But the mission statement for this deep dive is fascinating. It suggests that the confusion over fate, specifically, oscillating between thinking you have total control and thinking you have no control, is actually a root cause of the modern mental health crisis.
And the cure offered in these texts is a kind of cognitive restructuring of how we view reality itself.
We are literally going from the preserved tablet to cognitive behavioral therapy.
It's a big leap.
So let's unpack this. We have a really dense stack. We have got articles dealing with the definitions of kata and qadar. We have a very heavy academic paper on Al-Ghazali's Iqtisad, which, warning to you, the listener, involves some serious mental gymnastics.
It really does. And then we have the research on Islamic psychotherapy from the International Journal of Academic Research in Business and Social Sciences.
And crucially, we have comparative studies on modern thinkers like Muhammad Iqbal and Said Nursi, who take these ancient ideas and try to make them work for the modern scientific mind.
Right, they're trying to bridge that same gap.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, but I want to go deep here. We hear the terms kata and qadar thrown around a lot. It's my qadar, people say when they miss the bus. Are they just synonyms? Because the sources seem to be very, very pedantic about the difference.
They are, and for good reason. In casual conversation, yeah, people use them interchangeably. But in the, let's call it the theological engineering of the cosmos, they are distinct.
Okay.
Think of it like the difference between an architect and a general contractor.
Okay, I'm with you.
Let's look at qadar. Linguistically, it comes from a root, meaning measure, or valuation, or amount. So in the theological context, qadar is the blueprint. It's the predestination, the latent possibility, the scope and potential of a thing before it actually happens.
So qadar is the AutoCAD file, the grand design for the universe.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
Yeah.
One of our sources uses the phrase latent possibilities. It's the plan. It's the fact that water can boil at 100 degrees Celsius, or that you, as a human, have the potential to be an astronaut or a podcaster. The parameters are set. Now, kata is different. Kata refers to the decision, the ruling, or the execution. It's the moment that plan is brought into reality. It's the contractor on site.
So if qadar is the blueprint of a skyscraper, kata is the moment the construction crew actually pours the concrete for the 50th floor right here, right now.
That is a perfect analogy. There's a beautiful phrase in the classical texts. When they come together, they distinguish. When they separate, they unite.
What does that mean?
It means if you talk about them broadly, they both just mean God's control. But if you get technical and use both terms in one sentence, Qadar is the design phase, and Kata is the manufacturing phase.
That distinction helps. But honestly, it brings us immediately to the scary part, the part that makes me want to just close the book. The sources lay out these 4 pillars of belief in Qadar, and the first 2 seem to totally erase my freedom.
You're talking about al-ilm and al-kitaba, knowledge and writing.
Right. Al-Ilm is knowledge. The sources say God knows everything, past, present, future, before it happens. Not just the big stuff, but like which electron is going to spin which way. And Al-Kitaba is the writing.
The preserved tablet, Lav Mahfuz.
Yes, that everything was written in this preserved tablet 50,000 years before the creation of the heavens and the earth.
That's the script.
Exactly. And this is where I get completely stuck. If the script was written 50,000 years before the planet existed, how can I possibly claim I have free will? If the tablet says the host will drink coffee at 9 a.m. and I decide to be rebellious and drink tea, I've just proven God wrong, which in this theology is impossible.
So you have to drink the coffee.
I have to drink the coffee. The tea was never a real option. I'm
Right.
just a robot with a very convincing delusion of choice.
This is the time paradox, and it is, hands down, the biggest stumbling block for people. You're looking at it linearly. You're imagining God sitting at a cosmic desk in the year 50,000 BC, writing a to-do list for humanity, and now we're just checking off the boxes.
I mean, isn't that what the text says? It was written.
Not exactly. The sources, especially the explanation from Professor Shahul Hamid, offer a solution. It's often called the mirror analogy. But to really get it, you have to break your concept of time.
Okay. Break it for me.
Imagine you're a teacher. You have a student who hasn't studied all semester, never pays attention, and is right now asleep on his desk. The final exam is tomorrow. With almost 100% certainty that this student is going to fail.
Oh, I'd bet my house on it. Absolutely.
So you write down in your notebook, student X will fail the exam. The next day, the student predictably fails. Now, my question is, did your knowledge cause him to fail?
No, of course not. He failed because he didn't study. I knew he wouldn't. My writing it down was just a record of his future incompetence, not the cause of it.
Exactly. Your knowledge was reflective, not compelling.
Yeah.
Now, amplify that to an infinite degree. The source explains that God exists in what's called the eternal now. God is not bound by linear time like we are. We see time as a line past, present, future. God sees the entire timeline simultaneously, like a map spread out on a table.
So God seeing the future is like me looking at a 12-inch ruler. I can see the 1-inch mark and the 12-inch mark at the exact same time.
Yes, that's a good way to think about it. For God, the past, the present, and the future are all visible at once. So when God writes your destiny, he is not writing a script that forces you to act. He is writing down what he sees you freely choosing to do.
So his knowledge is a mirror.
It's a mirror reflecting your free choices, not a chain forcing your hand.
I want to buy that. I really, really do. But it still feels like a clever trick. If God sees the future, then the future is fixed, right? If I'm standing at a fork in the road and God sees me go left, can I actually go right? Because if I go right, God's vision was wrong. And God can't be wrong, so I have to go left. The mirror sounds nice, but isn't it just a very polite way of saying we're trapped?
That's the trap of thinking of God as watching a movie that's already been filmed. You're imagining God sitting in a theater. But the source asks you to remove the timeline entirely. Imagine a circle. God is the center point.
Okay.
Every point on the circumference, past, present, future, is equidistant to that center. God isn't waiting for you to choose. He is with you in the moment of choosing, and he is with you in the consequence of that choice, all at once. The constraint you feel is really just the limitation of your own linear brain trying to comprehend a non-linear reality.
Okay, that makes my head hurt, but I think I see a glimmer of light there. The writing isn't a script I'm forced to follow. It's more like an archival record of the choices I haven't made yet, but that God has already witnessed me making.
Correct. As the source says, God's knowledge is not compelling you, it is reflecting you.
But.
And there's always a but in theology.
We're too easy.
That solves the issue of knowledge, but it doesn't solve the issue of power. And this brings us to the other two pillars, al-Mashiach, which is will, and al-Khalq, which is creation.
And what do those imply?
Al-Mashiach means nothing happens without God's permission. And al-Khalq means God is the creator of everything. And everything includes your actions.
Wait, hold on. So God creates the table, the chair, the mountain. Sure, I get that. But he creates my movement. When I wave my hand, He created that.
This is where we have to enter the heavy lifting. We need to open up the file on Al-Ghazali. This is from the academic paper analyzing his work Al-Iqtisad. This is 11th century Asharite theology, and it gets pretty radical.
I remember reading this section and just having to put the book down and walk away. Ghazali seems to be arguing something about causality that goes against everything I learned in my high school physics class.
He absolutely does. The Asharite position basically throws out the idea of secondary causes.
Explain that. Because to me, cause and effect it's the law of the universe. I push a domino, it falls.
A secondary cause is the idea that fire burns cotton. The fire is the cause. The burning is the effect. We assume the fire itself possesses the power to burn. Ghazali says,
Right.
No, fire is an inanimate object. It has no will, no power. God creates the fire and God creates the burning. They just happen to occur together, habitually.
Okay, I have to stop you there because that's not what happens. If I strike a match, it's a chemical reaction. Oxidation. Heat energy is breaking chemical bonds. There is a clear physical causal chain. Are these sources really arguing that the fire is what?
Just a prop.
Yeah.
That all of physics is just a big illusion.
They aren't saying the physics is fake. They're asking a deeper question. What sustains the laws of physics from moment to moment?
Ghazali would ask you, have you ever actually seen the power of burning inside the flame itself? Or have you just seen the flame touch the cotton and then seen the cotton turn black?
I see the sequence of events.
Exactly. You see the sequence. You assume the cause is in the fire. Ghazali is stripping away that assumption. He calls it occasionalism. On the occasion of the fire touching the cotton, God creates the burning. It is a habitual course of nature, as he puts it, not an independent power held by the fire.
So the fire isn't actually doing the burning.
No, God is doing the burning.
Yeah.
The fire is just the signal, the time and place where God has chosen to create the effect of burning.
That is deeply unsettling. Because if you apply that same logic to me, I'm not a piece of cotton, I'm a human being.
And this is where Ghazali applies it, with his famous ring on the finger puzzle. It goes like this. You move your hand, there is a ring on your finger. The ring moves.
Obviously, yeah. My hand moved the ring. Friction, kinetic energy transfer, all of that.
But Ghazali asks, did your hand really move the ring?
Yes. Of course it did.
Ghazali argues, no. Your hand is a created object. It has no intrinsic power to create motion in another object. He argues that God created the movement of your hand, and God simultaneously created the movement of the ring. It is a synchronized event, perfectly orchestrated by the divine.
This sounds incredibly disempowering. I mean, if God moves my hand and God moves the ring, then I'm just a spectator in my own body. This brings us right back to the puppet paradox. I'm just watching the movie of my life. I'm not directing it.
It does, and this was the great debate of Islamic history. You had two extremes. On one side, you had the determinists, known as the Mujbira. They said, humans are like feathers in the wind, zero control. If you sin, God made you sin. If you do good, God made you do good.
That seems awfully convenient for sinners. Don't blame me for robbing the bank, officer. It was written on the tablet.
Exactly. It leads to moral laziness and a complete abdication of accountability. On the other extreme, you had the rationalists, the Mutazilites. They couldn't accept a God who would punish people for things they didn't really choose, so they swung the pendulum all the way back.
And what did they say?
They said humans are the creators of their own acts.
So I create my own walking, my own talking, my own choices.
Yes. They argued that God gives you the hardware, the body, the brain, the capacity, but the software, the action itself, is coded and executed entirely by you.
That sounds a lot more like modern Western individualism. You know, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
It does. But Ghazali and the Asharites had a huge problem with this. If you say humans create their actions, you are setting up billions of little co-creators alongside God. You are challenging God's omnipotence. If I can create a motion in the universe that God didn't authorize, then in a small way, I'm a rival God.
So we have a rock and a hard place. Either I'm a feather in the wind, which is determinism, or I'm a mini-God creating my own reality, which is rationalism. Both of those seem wrong. Where is the middle ground?
The middle ground is a concept called al-Kaz.
Al-Kaz. Okay, I remember this from the sources. It's translated as acquisition.
This is the theological tool that, for the mainstream Sunni tradition, kind of saved the day. The theory is this. God creates the act, but the human acquires it.
That sounds like clever wordplay. What does acquire actually mean in this context?
Okay, let's use the tremor versus the wave example from the Ghazali text. It's brilliant. Imagine two men. Man A has a medical condition, a tremor. His hand is shaking uncontrollably. Man B sees a friend across the street and waves his hand.
Okay, so from the outside, visually, both hands are moving. The physics are happening in both cases.
Physically, both movements are created by God. The atoms moving, the neurons firing, the muscles contracting. It's all from God's creative power. However, man A, the one with the tremor, feels compelled. He doesn't want his hand to move. He has no power over it.
Right. It's involuntary.
Man B, the waiter, feels a synchronization. He wills the wave and the wave happens. There's an internal alignment.
So the difference is entirely internal. It's about intent.
Yes. Ghazali argues that in the voluntary act, like the wave, God creates a power or a capacity within the human that aligns with the act he's creating. The human doesn't create the physics of the wave, but they acquire the responsibility for it because their will, their intent, aligned with God's creation of that act.
Hang on, let me see if I get this. If I pick up a pen, you're saying God is the one moving the atoms of the pen. God is firing the neurons in my arm. God is contracting the muscle. So what did I do? Did I just sit here and watch it happen?
You provided the locus for the act. Think of it like a stained glass window. The sun provides the light. That is God's power, his creation. But the window provides the color. That is your human intent. If the light comes through red, it's because the window is red. You didn't create the light, but you determined how it manifested. That coloring of the act is cause. It's the difference between an involuntary spasm and a purposeful salute.
So God provides the electricity, but I decide which light switch to flip. Is that close?
It's getting closer. It's more like God provides the electricity and the light bulb and the flow of the current. But you provide the desire for the light to be on. And when that desire exists, God creates the light. That acquisition is the moment of alignment. You own the act, even if you didn't engineer the atoms.
I see. So the tremor is pure motion without acquisition. The wave is motion plus acquisition.
Precisely. And that acquisition is enough to make you morally and spiritually responsible on Judgment Day. You aren't responsible for the physics. You are responsible for the intent and the alignment of your will.
This connects to that fascinating argument about bees, the beehive argument. I really did not expect to see geometry in a 1,000-year-old theology text.
It's Ghazali's way of proving that agency ultimately belongs to God, not the creature. He asks you to look at bees building a honeycomb. They build perfect hexagons.
Right, which we know is the most efficient shape for packing. No gaps, maximum storage area, minimum amount of wax. It's an absolute engineering marvel.
It's geometrically perfect. So Ghazali asks the simple question, does the bee know geometry? Did the bee go to engineering school?
No, of course not. The bee is just being a bee. It's instinct.
So if the bee doesn't have the intellectual capacity to understand the perfect geometry it is building, who is the real builder? Who is the real agent?
The agent must be acting through the bee.
Go on. Ghazali argues that the perfection we see in the natural world proves that the creatures themselves aren't the ones calling the shots. If the bee was the sole creator of its act, it would need to understand the mass. It doesn't. Therefore, God is the agent.
That's incredibly humbling. It really reduces the human ego quite a bit. We think we're building skyscrapers and coding AI, but maybe we're just like the bees building hexagons, and the act is just being acquired through us by a higher power.
And that reduction of ego is exactly where we pivot to the twist of this entire deep dive. Because this isn't just about humbling us philosophically, it's about healing us psychologically.
Okay, right. We need to move from 11th century Baghdad to the modern therapist's couch. But before we get to the therapy itself, we have to touch on the moderns mentioned in the outline. Because not everyone, especially in the 20th century, agreed with Ghazali's specific formulation. We have Muhammad Iqbal and Said Nursi.
Yes, two absolute giants of modern Islamic thought. And they both had to grapple with this problem of action in a world that was being dominated by Western science, colonialism, and a very different idea of the self.
But let's start with Iqbal. He's known as the poet-philosopher of the East. What was his take on all this?
Iqbal was deeply critical of what he saw as a fatalistic attitude that had taken over the Muslim world. He felt that feather in the wind idea had destroyed their civilization, made them passive. So he leaned heavily towards a much more dynamic, almost Mutazilite view.
So for him, the script isn't finalized. It's not a done deal.
He argues that God's creative life is organic and ongoing. He famously said, the ultimate ego, God, makes the emergent ego, man, a participant in its creative life. For Iqbal, Qadar isn't a cage, it's a challenge. He wants you to grab the pen and co-write your destiny with God. It's a very empowering, very proactive theology.
And what about Said Nursi? He was writing from a completely different context, from a jail cell in a newly secular Turkey,
Nursi takes a much more traditional Asherite approach, but he gives it a psychological twist. He focuses on something he calls al-juzuz al-ikhtiyari, the partial will. He admits this human will is incredibly weak. It's a tiny, almost invisible thing.
So we have almost no power. Is that what he's saying?
He says our will is like a hand on the steering wheel of a massive truck. The engine, God's power, is infinite. The vehicle is enormous. But your hand, as weak as it is, can turn the wheel left or right. It doesn't create the forward motion, but it directs it.
I see.
And he emphasizes that this weakness is actually our strength because it forces us to rely on the infinite power behind us. It cultivates humility and trust.
So Iqbal says, rise up and create with God. And Nursi says, recognize your weakness and let God create through you.
That's a great summary. And interestingly, both of those paths, though different, are designed to lead to mental resilience. Which brings us, finally, to the therapy.
Right. And the sources make a very bold claim here, that misunderstanding these mechanics of fate is a primary driver of modern mental illness.
Specifically, it drives the two great plagues of the modern mind, anxiety and depression.
Okay, connect the dots for us. How does 11th century metaphysics cure 21st century anxiety?
Well, think about the modern anxious mind. It's an engine that is constantly, relentlessly trying to calculate and control outcomes. If I send this email, will I get the job? If I don't check the stove again, will the house burn down? We are obsessed with cause and effect because we believe we are the sole cause.
We think if we just pull the lever in exactly the right way, we are guaranteed to get the pellet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you pull that lever and you don't get the pellet, or you're just terrified of not getting it, you crash. You question your worth, your ability, everything. The Asherite theologians are stepping in to say, you never controlled the pellet dispenser. You only controlled your decision to reach for the lever.
That shift, separating the reach from the reward, that's where the therapy begins.
That's the core of it. Let's look at the extremes again, but this time through a psychological lens. We talked about the fatalists, the Jabariya, and the absolute free willers, the Qadariya.
Let's start with the Qadariya, that absolute free will mindset. This is basically modern hustle culture. You are the master of your destiny. If you can dream it, you can achieve it.
Psychologically, this places an infinite, crushing burden on the individual. If you succeed, you become arrogant, which is its own spiritual disease. But what if you fail?
You're destroyed.
You're destroyed. You feel crushing guilt, shame, and inadequacy. I am the creator of my life and I created a mess.
Yeah.
That is a perfect recipe for severe depression and anxiety.
You're basically trying to carry the weight of the entire world on your shoulders. You feel like you have to control every single variable.
And since you can't control every variable because you aren't God, you live in a state of chronic, unending stress.
Okay, so what about the other side? The fatalist. The I'm a feather in the wind guy.
The psychological profile there is what we call learned helplessness,
Yeah.
passivity, apathy. Why should I even bother trying? It's all written anyway. This leads to stagnation, a lack of purpose, and the depression of meaninglessness. They also tend to blame God for their own bad choices.
Right, there was that great analogy in the source about punching a wall.
Yes, the source addresses the fatalist who says, I sinned because God wrote for me to sin, so don't blame me. The scholar's reply is brilliant, he says. That's like punching a brick wall with all your might and then blaming the laws of physics for your broken hand.
Yeah.
You knew the wall was hard. That's the law of causality, or Sharia in the moral sense. You chose to punch it anyway. You can't blame the nature of the wall for your decision to strike it.
So both extremes are psychologically damaging. We need a middle path. The sources call this wasatiyah. How does Al-Kaz, this old theological idea acquisition, actually work as a therapeutic tool?
This is the key takeaway for anyone listening. Al-Kaz therapeutically separates the effort from the outcome.
Okay, let's make this practical. Let's use a case study. Let's invent Omar. Omar has just been laid off from his job. He has a family to feed. He is panicking. How does he apply this?
Okay, great example. The modern, absolute free will mind tells Omar, this is all your fault. You weren't good enough. You need to fix this instantly or you are a complete failure. The result, sky-high anxiety, panic attacks, despair.
The fatalist mind tells Omar, God wanted you to be poor. It's your destiny. Don't even bother applying for jobs. Just sit on the couch and wait for a miracle. Result, deep depression, apathy, helplessness.
The Kaz mind tells Omar something radically different. It says, Omar, your sphere of control, your area of responsibility is the acquisition. Your job is to make the effort. Your worship right now, your test, is to update your resume, to network professionally, to prepare for interviews, to do your absolute best.
And the outcome? Getting the job.
The outcome, whether he gets that job or another one or no job for a while, is al-Tulk. It is God's creation. It is outside his domain. If he doesn't get the job after a great interview, it's not because he is a failure. It's because God's plan, the Qadar, has a different measure for him right now.
That is incredibly freeing. It just kills performance anxiety. Omar can walk into that interview thinking, my job is to give the best interview I can. The result is not my burden to carry.
It creates a psychological safety net. You are 100% responsible for the input, but you are 0% responsible for the outputs. This is the absolute core of Islamic psychotherapy. It restructures the nafs, the self.
The paper we read lists a therapeutic toolkit, 5 pillars of this fate-based healing. I want to stick with Omar and walk through these because they're very practical steps.
Let's do it.
Pillar number 1, sabr, patience. Now, usually when we hear patience, we think of just, gritting your teeth and suffering in silence.
But here, sabr is defined as active patience. For Omar, this means emotional regulation. It means restraining the self from complaining, why me, this isn't fair, from blaming my boss as evil, and from despairing I'll never find another job. The source calls it the bridge between the event and the reaction.
So Omar gets the layoff notice, that's the event. Before he spirals into panic, which is the knee-jerk reaction, he uses sabr to create a space, a pause. He acknowledges the pain but refuses to let the narrative become toxic.
Yes. And the psychological benefit is resilience.
Yeah.
It's grounded in a core belief we talked about earlier. God does not test a soul beyond its capacity. So if this layoff is happening, it means Omar can handle it. That belief alone lowers cortisol levels.
Pillar number 2, Rida, radical contentment.
This goes a step deeper than patience. Patience might still hurt. You're enduring it. Rida is acceptance. It's the belief that the decree is actually good for you in the grand scheme of things, even if it feels terrible right now. It's trusting the architect's blueprint.
The source mentioned this is the antidote to envy. Let's say Omar finds out his colleague got a big promotion on the same day he got fired.
The normal human reaction is burning jealousy. Why him? I work harder than he does. But if Omar truly internalizes Qadar, the idea that everyone is allotted their specific measure, then being jealous makes no logical sense.
Because that promotion was written for the colleague, not for Omar. It was never his to begin with.
Exactly. It was their measure. Envying it is like being a size 9 and envying someone else for getting a free pair of size 12 shoes. They weren't made for you. This eliminates a huge source of social anxiety and bitterness.
Okay. Pillar number 3, shukr, gratitude. But the source breaks this down into a really interesting process. Tahali, tajali. These sound like deep Sufi terms.
They are. They're like spiritual technologies. So takali means emptying. For Omar, this means he needs to empty his heart of entitlement. The idea that I was entitled to that job forever. Tahali is adorning or filling that empty space with good traits. In this case, gratitude for the skills he has, the health he has, the family he has. Recognizing the giver.
And tajali.
Tajali is the manifestation. It's the peace and tranquility that naturally emerges when your heart is empty of entitlement and full of gratitude.
So the therapy here is a cognitive shift from focusing on what I've lost to who is the source of all that I still have.
Precisely. It reframes the loss. Maybe losing that job was actually God removing something harmful from Omar's life that he just couldn't see yet.
Pillar number 4, tawakkul. We usually translate this as trust, but again, the sources warn against the lazy, passive version of trust.
Yes, this is the famous tie your camel principle. There's a story, a hadith, where a man comes to the Prophet Muhammad and asks, should I tie my camel and trust in God, or should I leave it untied and trust in God? And the Prophet's reply was, tie it and then trust.
So the formula in the source was perfect. Maximum effort plus total surrender, tawakkul.
This is the Kaz concept in action again. Omar ties the camel. That's him updating his resume, applying for 50 jobs, preparing for interviews.
Yeah.
Then he trusts God that the camel will be there in the morning. That's the outcome. True anxiety relief comes when you know you tied the knot as tight as you could, but you also know that if a wolf comes and chews through the rope, it was a divine decree, not your negligence.
And finally, pillar number 5. And this is the one that really seems to bring the agency back in a powerful way. Dua, prayer.
Right, the paradox of prayer. If everything is already written on the tablet 50,000 years ago, why should Omar even bother praying for a new job? Is he trying to edit the script?
Exactly. If the tablet says Omar is unemployed for 6 months, can a prayer change it to 2 weeks? Are we negotiating with God?
And the classical answer is profound. Prayer is part of the destiny. Prayer is one of the causes that God has decreed will bring about a certain effect.
Wait, my head is spinning again. Say that one more time.
Think of the mirror analogy again. God, existing in the eternal now, sees Omar facing this layoff. He also sees that in his moment of distress, Omar will choose to raise his hands and sincerely ask for help. And because he sees Omar praying, he writes a solution for Omar in the tablet.
So the solution was written in first place because God knew Omar was going to pray for it?
Yes. Omar's prayer is one of these secondary causes or acquisitions that God uses to create the outcome. The source says, prayers can result in personal miracles. It completely restores agency to the helpless patient. You aren't just passively watching the movie, you are actively interacting with the director.
That's an incredibly powerful image. It means we aren't passive at all. We are in a constant dialogue with fate itself.
Exactly. It raises the believer above, as the text says, the normal ways of nature.
Wow. We have covered a lot of ground. I mean, we started with this deep metaphysical puzzle. Did my hand move the ring, or did God? We went through the heavy theology of Asherism, the friction with moderns like Iqbal and Nursi, and we landed on a practical 5-step therapeutic toolkit for Omar, and really for all of us.
It's a journey from the most abstract philosophy to the most deeply personal psychology.
So, if we have to synthesize this for the listener, what is the single main takeaway?
The takeaway is that constraints actually create freedom. If you believe you are responsible for everything, the Qadari of you are crushed by the weight of the universe. If you believe you are responsible for nothing, the Jabari of you are crushed by meaninglessness.
And the synthesis is the middle path.
The synthesis is, you are responsible for your effort, but you are safe within the constraints of God's plan for the outcome. That safety net is what allows you to take risks, to work hard, to love deeply, and to fail without being psychologically destroyed. Fate isn't a cage. It's the solid ground beneath your feet that lets you stand up and try in the first place.
That's beautiful. It changes that puppet image entirely. We aren't puppets on strings. Maybe we're more like actors who have been given a specific role. The script is there, but how we play the character, the emotion we put into it, the sincerity, that's all ours. And the director is watching to see how we perform.
And as we just discussed, is ready to rewrite the next scene if we sincerely ask him to.
Which leads perfectly to our final provocative thought. We always like to leave you with something to chew on.
We talked about God being in the eternal now, seeing the past, present, and future all at once. And we talked about how prayer can change destiny because God sees the prayer and writes the outcome accordingly.
Right.
So if you are sitting here right now listening to this, and you make a sincere prayer, a dua for something in your future, and God, 50,000 years ago, saw you making this very prayer at this very moment and wrote your destiny based on it.
Where does that leave us?
And that's the question. Are you, in this very moment, reaching back through time and helping to write the ink on the preserved tablet? Are you a participant in your own creation history?
That gives me chills. That we are right now participating in the writing of the tablet.
It's a thought that blurs the line between the creator and the created, just enough to make you realize how incredibly intimate that relationship really is.
A relationship between the hand and the tremor.
Indeed.
Thank you for going on this deep dive with us. It's been a heavy one, but hopefully a healing one.
It's always a pleasure.
To our listeners, go tie your camel, say your prayers, and find your balance. We'll see you on the next deep dive. Thank you.